I'm Wendy. I work with FamilySearch and have the opportunity to spend time with our followers on Facebook and YouTube and just talk about things that we're interested in, such as family history. And today it's all about storytelling, one of my favorite subjects. So I'm going to invite our two guests to go ahead and introduce themselves. And then we are going to talk to you about some tips for storytelling together. And then these two are going to model those tips and we get to comment on it and say, you did that really well. And I really like how you did that, because I think one way to learn is to watch people do it. And they have been friends since the 90s and haven't seen each other for a while. So we get to kind of witness them reconnecting and modeling storytelling. And so let us know what you think, where you're joining from, and what questions you might have about storytelling. So before we go into modeling storytelling or talking about good practices for storytelling, tell us who you both are. And we'll start with you, Laurie.
I'm Laurieann Thorpe, and I have been a lover of stories from way before it was cool. You know, like I was reading.
Yes.
My mom tells a story to me all the time about how I used to get like these thick manuals, like her college course books, and I'd have them upside down, and wherever I was sitting, I was just pretending to read way before I had the actual skills to be able to do it. Love stories.
Okay. And we'll have to go more into that, but just tell us a little bit about what you do professionally and how you kind of have the understanding of family that you do.
I'm the executive director of Prevent Child Abuse Utah. And we grew our family a little bit non-traditionally. So we have our kids, all three of our kids were adopted. 2 were with us in foster care for about 4 years before we were able to finalize adoption with them. So you have always loved stories. You work with families, and especially families that come together in different circumstances. And so you're really going to help us from your perspective, but also the perspective of people who have, like you said, how did you say your family came together? What was the phrase you used? Non-traditionally.
Non-traditionally. Okay. And Lisa Michele, please introduce yourself.
Okay, I'm Lisa Michele Church. I am an attorney in Salt Lake City, Utah. I'm the mother of 2 grown boys. And I love storytelling just like Lar. I grew up with a mom who was a fabulous storyteller. She could just keep you on the edge of your seat and it was always that kind of question of like, is this really true? Or are you exaggerating? But you were so riveted, you couldn't help yourself. And so I always loved that. I've loved in my law practice that I have been able to write some people's stories and represent some people who wanted their stories told. And I think law has given me a chance to really advocate for people and their stories. So I see a tie-in to everything I do professionally.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much for joining. And I appreciate the perspectives that you bring from your personal and professional lives. And I think we're just really excited to kind of engage in this space with you and learn from you both. So just thank you. And you both, your friendship started. Tell us just the origin story of that.
Oh, whose version do you want? Mine or Laurieann's? I picked her out of a crowd. I knew she had tremendous potential. She argued with me, but I was an in-house attorney at a big company and she was working in a different department. And I went and said, I want this woman in my legal department.
Yes.
So anyway, that's my story. I don't know, Laurieann, what you would say.
I think you got it right. She definitely saw something in me. I wanted something completely different in life. I wanted my family. I wanted it yesterday. I'd been married for about a year when we met. And so I was planning to, that was my entire focus. And she encouraged me to look for some other opportunities as well. And I pushed back. But then she was right. Ultimately, in the end, she was always right about me.
This is so fun. And I think I'd love to just have a conversation about why storytelling matters. And I think I'd love for you both to speak on, both lenses, personal and professional. And I think we need to mention my tie in here. Actually, I don't know if this is where I'm going to assert myself, but you guys used to scrapbook and you would get together and scrapbook. And back in the day, that was my whole life. And I love scrapbooking. So I love that connection. And we can see some of your scrapbooks behind you, Lisa Michele. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, we were super nerdy scrapbookers. We were obsessive about it and we did it. Oh, I don't know. I mean, probably weekly, and tried to outdo each other. Oh, I did this coolest page. You've got to copy it. But it was very gratifying. I always say I did my kids' scrapbooks to prove I was a good mother. And now I won't let my kids have the scrapbook. So apparently I had a different agenda than storytelling. But
so why, talk to us about why storytelling is important. And you kind of touched on it a little bit, but let's go a little bit deeper. And especially with the lens of, kind of connecting people in ways that maybe there's no other way to do it. Like how speak to that. Do you want to go first, Laurie? Yeah.
And Lisa Michele and I were both journalists before we were friends too, right? I think that we always had a love of words and how words can paint a picture. That was something I think that was compelling for both of us and translated really well into scrapbooking as storytelling, reading as storytelling, picking just the right headline for a story is also storytelling. So I love, and I think Lisa Michele does too, just the way that we can build something with words. Right? The way that we can create a scaffolding and connect with each other around that you can put a pile of words into the world and someone can connect with you as a result of that. I think there's real power in storytelling and the way that we use that medium.
I totally agree. That's exactly my thing. I loved words too, and found a kindred spirit with Laurieann because she and I could text each other a piece of something we just read and then go on for an hour about it. But for me, the storytelling is more profound the older I get, because I recognize how much people's stories have affected me and the connections that you build with people. And honestly, the part that I love the best is the surprises, how you meet someone and you think, wow, this is a really different experience than mine. And then the more they tell you their story, the more you're like, but then I got this, and it's really similar in this way. And pretty soon you're just, really connecting with them in a deep way. And that allows you to have a richer life. I feel like I'm super curious about other people generally, but I love it when I think I know them and then they tell me a story and I'm like, whoa, I had no idea. And that's what I really love about storytelling.
Thank you. I think if we think about attributes or traits of engaging in storytelling, that's kind of what we're going to talk about next. You talked about one, which is curiosity. And I think I like to put gentle curiosity in front of that, because there's curiosity that is like satisfy what I need to know. But gentle curiosity is more, asking questions for the person to open up. Something else that one of you mentioned was like you're kind of sometimes surprised. And I think this idea of listening is a challenge for a lot of people, myself included, because we're distracted. And so active listening is a phrase I like to use, because you're just listening. You're not thinking, what am I going to say next? Yeah. What do I have to relate to this? It's just, you're very active in your listening. What are some other attributes or traits of storytelling? And I'm meaning more like engaging in storytelling with somebody else that you've experienced. And I've got a list. So those were two. Well, gentle curiosity and active listening. Okay, go ahead, Lisa Michele.
One thing that I notice a lot, and Laurie and I both did this because we had to interview people when we were journalists, and then in our professions, listening is a really big thing. So listening is really one of those fine arts that I think is underestimated, because it doesn't look like you're doing anything, but you can tell when someone's listening to you and thinking what they're going to say next. And especially a story killer is when you say, oh, that reminds me of when this happened to me. And then the person is like, but I was talking about my situation. And, they just didn't get enough space in the story for their experience because you started with yours. And there's definitely a place for empathy, but I think being patient is another big storytelling thing because, you may think, oh, that reminds me, I want to tell them about this. And then that's kind of the end of their story. And it's a moment.
As I'm impatiently interrupting you, I like that because you're talking about it as a space. And so there's conversation and then there's storytelling. And something that, and Laurie, I think maybe you can touch more on this, is this idea of being non-judgmental and body language. Talk a little bit about that, because those two go together.
That's so interesting because the attribute I thought of was safety. That I need to feel, and that has to do with what you're talking about with space, right? I feel safe sharing my story with you. I feel like it's not you've heard the phrase pearls before swine. I have things that I think are special and important, and I want to share them in a way that it's going to be received and feel held. I want to feel held by a reception of a story. And I was going to say too, that when Lisa, Michele, and I talk, the way that we overcome that, that reminds me, is we just do not stop talking. We just keep going and going until everyone has thought of absolutely everything that has reminded them of and has been able to tell that story.
It's true. It's an endless chain.
Yeah, I love that. And I like how you said safety instead of non-judgment, because I think that, and this idea, I think, like Lisa, Michele, you talked about listening. Sometimes it seems like you're not doing something. So be thinking of your body language as you are the recipient, right? As you are the recipient, and to be a safe space is to be open, right? Sometimes if you feel yourself kind of physically closing off or like protecting yourself, that tends to be defensive or when you're in judgment. So for me, I like to remind myself, to physically be open. And safety, I think, or non-judgment, is really about understanding the complexity that somebody's lived experience is different than yours, regardless of where or what you've done. Being able to say they have a different experience and I want to kind of witness it, I think is really important. And so I love the idea of just, someone sharing their experience. And we're not here to judge it or to make, statements about it. But when storytelling is done, I don't even want to use the word effectively because that sounds like a business transaction. When it's done sincerely, it's very connective, right? And I think I loved what you said, Lisa, Michele. You can oftentimes be surprised by someone and their situation. And okay, let's restate kind of the pieces of storytelling as I'm here with Lisa, Michele, and Laurieann, and we're talking today about storytelling that connects. We talked about gentle curiosity, active listening, and we're going to go with safety, body language. There's also tactics like open-ended questions and just being a recipient of somebody's experience.
Yeah,
is there anything?
One of the things that I'm reminded of is another thing that really shuts the story down is when you try and fix it for them. Mm-hmm. And I have definitely been guilty of this, especially with my kids. You don't want them to suffer, so you're like, let me cut to the chase here, what you should be doing. But the thing I've learned is that people don't tell you that. If they want help, they'll ask you. But mostly if they're telling you a story, they just want to be heard. They just want that moment of recognition. Mm-hmm. I exist. This is real. This has happened to me. And so for me to jump in with a solution prematurely is really hard. And I think that's, again, in my professional life, that's really important because as a lawyer, I have a million solutions, right? Yes. But even as a mom or a friend, I should just be quiet for a minute. That's okay. Mm-hmm. You're not in charge of it. It's all right, and so that helps me.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. I think that's extremely important. You're a recipient. You're the recipient of somebody's story. And you're not always going to be in this, this isn't always going to be the case, but when you're the recipient, I think that's a great behavior. Laurie, did you want to add anything to our list before we jump into you two doing storytelling?
Let's do it.
Okay, so what I'd love to do, and for the people who are watching, we're happy to have you here. If you're watching live or later, it's really a pleasure to be with these two. And as we just listed some of the sort of attributes or traits of connective storytelling, we're going to model it. And so I'd love for you both to share a story with each other, and then we'll kind of review, not necessarily critique, but we'll learn from you. And so there's a couple of topics we could talk about. You could do a family history story. You could do a family story. You can share something about your life with each other. You can just decide which one to do. But I think for today, we'll do like 3 story sets. So for the first one, you guys get to choose. And who wants to go first?
Well, I'll go first because
Okay.
I've been dying to talk to Laurieann. We haven't been able to connect recently. And so, the stories have piled up. So I will tell you a sad one, Lar, that shows you my vulnerability, but it's just really important to me that you understand where I am right now, because I think you would get how this would have affected me. So I was in my own backyard with my granddaughter, who's 5, and she was just playing hopscotch, and she was really cute, and she was telling me all about hopscotch and how she just learned it. And Grandma, can you hopscotch? And I was like, of course I can hopscotch. I used to be so good at hopscotching, throwing the little chain and all this. So I foolishly get on the hopscotch and start hopping. And I can't hopscotch anymore, I realize. But when I realize it, I'm actually on one foot, tipping forward, and then I fall. And I fall exactly on my face.
Oh.
And it hits on stones. I have stones in my backyard, and she was doing it on these stones. So I take the full impact on my face. And Goldie, my granddaughter, she's just like, Grandma, what happened? I was a little bit knocked out, honestly, because of I didn't brace my fall, and there's quite a bit of blood. And so luckily her dad, my son, runs over and, Mom, are you okay? And I stand up. I'm like, yeah, I mean, my arms aren't broken. I had a year before I had broken my arm ice skating with Goldie. So she's already thinking I'm a loser. But anyway, so what Laurieann knows is that I have this huge dental phobia, and I haven't been to the dentist for 15 years, even though I'm a very responsible adult. It is hard for me to go to the dentist. And so as I'm standing there in the backyard, I'm realizing this is probably a dental emergency, because all of my teeth have been knocked and they're kind of loose,
Oh.
and it's bleeding. And my daughter-in-law is a nurse, Goldie's mom. So she comes and looks, and she says, no, you're not going to need stitches, but something's going on with your mouth. There's a lot of damage in there. So I have to confront the dentist. And I just cannot abide that this is a problem I have. I think, what in the world is wrong with me? But I go in and have a really great dentist who actually was the one that treated me 15 years ago and knows that I shake uncontrollably and I, try and run. He's like, wow, not only have you broken your teeth, but you have broken like the bone across your jaw. So now you're going to need like all these implants and such. So I'm just hysterical, like, what is going on? But I was proud of myself because I realized my weakness, and I made the arrangements for all the surgeries and stuff, and took my husband with me so that I could be medicated and unaware. But the thing that has really bothered me, Laurie, is that I have lost some weird confidence from that. It's like a 1-2 punch. It was like, I actually think this is funny, because the phrase kicked in the teeth is like, when you get thrown, right? You get lost. And that is kind of what's happened. Is my job is presenting to people and speaking in groups and, having this amount of self-confidence. And I mean, I've done 2 of the surgeries and I have 1 more coming up, but it's just been like, how do I move on from this and kind of literally and figuratively regain my balance? I've just been going over and over that loop in my mind about, I mean, physically I'm recovered, but I can just feel something in my professional life is askew because I don't trust that I'm going to be able to, just boldly stand up and start doing something again. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So you were leaning over, and now now you've sort of overlaid it into your bigger experience, and it's affecting your confidence. And
yeah, and like you and I have talked about before, sometimes there are those mystical things in your life where you are literally out of balance in your life. And then I kind of had a physical manifestation of that. And then I've tried to regroup and, just be resilient and be like, I'm fine. And I am fine. I'm going to be fine. But it's just been weird to see the effect on my professional identity, I guess.
It is. That is such an interesting, like that it affected your professional perception. That's because it was hopscotch in the backyard with your granddaughter.
Right. It isn't, I mean, I didn't do it in front of a group. Nobody knows it happened to me, but it was kind of like I think there's a boldness that you have to approach life with, and that just evaporated in the consequence of both the physical injury and then the dentist thing, which humiliates me that I'm so not over that,
It's so interesting because it feels like it doesn't surprise me that you've had this reaction. No, because this is how you approach the world with me, right? In storytelling, and you have a dream and you tell me about it, and then I go, this is what it means in your life. or I think too, like these childlike experiences, the fear of the dentist, that's a kid thing, right? That's something you've had from the time that you were small, and you're doing hopscotch, and that's a thing you do with grandkids when they're smaller, or you did it when you were small. And so then to just have this crisis of confidence because you couldn't get, I don't know if you're feeling like you didn't have the essentials or something, right? Like it's just like I've built on all these things, and there's these childlike experiences. It doesn't surprise me that it's translated for you, because that feels like a truth for how you and I approach the world.
Yeah, we're always looking for like the double meanings and stuff, right?
Yes. Well,
triple
interpreting things, right? I'm at the risk of doing what we just said not to do. It just, as you're talking, it reminded me of I recently fell down the stairs, just like
really?
Yes, like the 10th stair up. I was dragging a heavy basket with me, and I just lost my footing and fell down the stairs. And it was just like, it's just walking, it's just stairs, and I'm not that old, right? And I just ended up face first on the ground, and I had no idea, like it just, and I had this moment of overlay like you did, where I had this sensation, and it was so similar to something else I'd experienced with some work I'm doing in therapy, where I just really thought about, it's just so fascinating how I fell down the stairs. Okay, this was my thought. I fell down the stairs and I don't even get a day off.
I love it. That's perfect.
Well, it's just right, because this is how we approach the world. Something happens, and then we think about the applicability to all these other aspects of our life. So it does. Okay, first of all, I'm just so sad that you fell and that you have to have all that work done. I remember when you had the last dental work done 15 years ago, and how awful that was.
About it.
No, I don't. I mean, I disagree with you there. I think that being brave when you're the most afraid is the best kind of bravery. I don't think that's being a baby, because every time you pick yourself up and get yourself to the dentist's office. So let's give you some points there.
I know, that's true. And I had to do that thing I'm not great at, which is advocate for myself, because they kept saying, well, just come in, you can stay conscious, we'll just do some of the procedure, and then you're gonna have to make some decisions. And I was like, okay. And then I went home and I thought, what am I thinking? And I called them, screwed up my courage and called them and said, I know myself, it's not going to work. I need to bring someone else with me. And, they were great, but it was like, I had to say that. They were going to assume I was totally fine with it. And you know how bad that is for me. I don't really like to admit those things, but I have forced myself in this situation to do it.
Nor do you like to be the one who has to bring someone else to advocate for you either.
No, that was a hard thing, right?
Okay, I want to jump in and first of all, like Lisa, thank you. Lisa Michele, thank you for sharing that. And what's interesting, I think, is that you already know Laurie's a safe space. So that bond has already been created. And what I appreciated, Laurie, was that I think the importance of the body language really showed up in kind of the reactions and the, doing things in a way that indicated you were listening. And then it seemed like there was increased vulnerability as Lisa Michele was sharing, which, thank you. I think modeling that is really important, because when you're vulnerable, like, it builds trust and connection. And there's a difference between being vulnerable and, maybe oversharing. So that was like, it feels weird to say, great job on being vulnerable. And I'm wondering if, Laurie, if you would want to share, like, maybe let's do maybe a family history story or something a little different, and we'll just kind of gauge that interaction. And I also appreciated this idea of, storytelling, right? There's usually a character, there's an experience, there's a location, but then you added into it this part about feeling like it was a difficult thing. And I know for a lot of people, when they're storytelling or sharing, it's not like you go about and say, I'm going to storytell and call my friend. But you're connecting and expressing things can be very helpful. And so having a recipient to that, regardless of whether or not she has any key advice or anything to offer, that's a gift right there, is in the listening, I think. So anyway, okay. I hate to say great job on that really awful story.
Well, it's good for me to have Laurie know it about me, though, because it's going to factor into other things in our lives. So
yes. I love how you said that, because I think being, with the people that you trust or feel safe with, there's an opportunity to really share parts of you that I think are powerful, but also vulnerable. So we'll shift gears and we'll go to Laurie, and let's hear a family history story, because there's someone in your family who loves family history. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yes. In fact, with the main character of any story I have about family history is my dad, who has my entire life been a historian and he is a family historian, and he spent his career in genealogy, and I remember going to. He would take a child to work day, and there were not a few of us in terms of the children he had. And so when it was occasionally my turn to go with him to work, I just remember it being the most boring thing ever. Because it would be like, okay, go fetch this microfiche for me, or go, this was the 80s. So I never caught I'm an adult now, I would have to say I've never caught the vision, but because he's cornered that market. But I love to listen to him talk about family history. So, and I know he's just like this reservoir of family history stories. So of course I called and asked for one, and he gave me 8 because this is my dad. He just is like, well, there's this, or there's this, or, oh, this one's good. You can, and did you know about this ancestor? He has it, my parents have kind of come together in a really cool way. My mom is an artist. Well, she's many things. One of them is an artist. And so he used to bring home these teeny tiny 2-inch tall pictures of our ancestors. And she took these teeny tiny pictures and drew them into 5x7 portraits. And we have them hanging on our walls in our kitchen, all of our ancestors. So one wall is those ancestors that she drew, and one wall is pictures of us, and one is the grandkids. And she just, anyway, so they both have kind of married these ideas of family history in my mind. And he was telling me this funny story about, this is his favorite family history story that involves him. And it's when he and his dad and his brother went fishing one day. And while they were fishing, his twin sisters were born. So his dad missed the birth because he was out fishing with his boys. And my dad, he remembers coming home and having lunch with his sister. And he's still, the sense of injustice he feels that he had to share his Twinkie with his sister because, mom and dad were off.
But it wasn't just a baby, it was twins?
It was twins. Yes, he didn't miss it. He missed 2 births for the price of 1. And so he thinks that's just, that when he talks about an anecdote from his childhood, that is the one that sticks out for him, that he played such, that he was the reason that his dad missed that birth. It felt like a moment for him where he got preferential treatment. So it was a big deal for him.
Oh my gosh, did his mom ever get upset that the dad missed the birth?
I am 1,000% sure she was upset. He doesn't mention that at all, okay. but she was not one to hold her tongue when she was dissatisfied. He gave me, at one point, he gave me her journal and was asking me to kind of transcribe it for him on I don't know if that's the right word, but she wasn't quiet about her complaints. That's a family trait as well.
Yeah. Well, I want to know about the Twinkie. Why was that such a focus of his attention to share his Twinkie?
I mean, I think it was the way I'm interpreting the story, and I don't know that he would interpret it this way. He'll probably watch this and call me and correct all the things I say wrong. But I think it's interesting because it was this moment for him. It was so special because of the preferential treatment, and then it was back to life as usual. And not only do I have to come back and not be special, but now I have to share with my sister when I have just this limited supply of the thing I love, right? And so, I think that was the significance for him, is that it was just like I was special for a minute, and then I was not ever again, because then there were the twins. And
I love that it tells you a lot about your dad, right? It really does. It just paints a picture of him.
Yeah, and he would probably be upset with me for sharing that one, because he gave me so many others of cool ancestors that we have. And he always tells us we come from a long line of horse thieves. And that's, I'm like, well, okay, that's right.
Tantalizing right there.
Right? Yeah. So
I know. No, I think the thing that's funny is your dad's probably told you all these family stories about the ancestors, and what you really want is his story, right?
Yes.
That's what you really want. And he doesn't even think that's a big deal, because he was telling you about someone from 1850, and you're like, but what about you, Dad?
Well, and all the intricate details of how to find this. Now, if you go here and you look at this, then you're going to be able to find this story. And if you look up so-and-so, then that's going to tell you this about us. And I'm like, Dad, I know, because the journey is so much a part of the process for him. He loves the journey part. And I'm just like, just tell me this. I love to listen to him tell the story of the journey, right? Like I love to listen to him, but that's a thing about me. I love to listen to anyone talk about anything that they're passionate about, and that's
remember
his.
Once you gave me a challenge to find a family history story in my life and give it to you, so you could pretend like it was your story. And that was classic, me and you right there. Because you wanted the end result. And I'm like, but Laurie, you got to know this and this. And you're like, don't care. Just tell me how it went and I'll use it. And that works perfectly.
Yes, you know me so well. And my dad is just like, he wants to do all the details. It's adorable.
It is adorable.
I think for Father's Day, I think like a case of Twinkies would make a great gift.
My mom would kill me. Yeah, we gotta keep them both happy. But maybe I could give him one Twinkie and make him split it.
Give him a supply. Okay, I really like. I love the, like, you're such a good storyteller, Laurie, and I think this idea of communicating what you're feeling through your, body language and emotion was awesome. And I really liked how kind of Lisa Michele kept you going a little bit by asking these questions and not, turning it on her. And so that was awesome. I want to know, Lisa Michele, do you have a family history story that you want to share that maybe Laurie hasn't heard?
Yeah, I actually am going to give her an update when I see her next on this really cool Victorian mansion that's in southern Utah. It's a ghost house. And it's a house that my great-great-grandma built in 1899. And it's huge. And it's got like all this Victorian beautiful woodwork, and it's red brick, and it's in the middle of nowhere. And every few years I would go to it and just check in on it. And I went in on a few years ago, and cows were living in it. And I was so horrified. I was so heartbroken. And my kids were like, we got to do something. But someone else owns the property. And so there was no real place for me to interfere, but I called the guy anyway. And I said, do you care if I rent a dumpster and just like get a bunch of my family members to come clean up this house? He's like, why are you going to do that? I said, it just breaks my heart. My great grandma was a fancy lady. She sent to Chicago for all this fancy Victorian furniture. And it was a mansion in its day. And these cow poops are just breaking my heart. Anyway, so what happened was I spent a couple years reading about it, writing about it, hosting really fun little ghost tours where it's boarded up. So inside is pitch dark, but it still has the beautiful woodwork and this big staircase and everything. So I would take people through with tours with lanterns and tell them the stories of what happened in each room. And so I loved it because I was able to raise the money to put a new metal roof on it, which is the thing that will keep it from falling down, apparently. And I just went by, Laurieann, a couple of weeks ago when I was in southern Utah. I just thought, I want to see, you never know, because you can't go there in the winter. You never know if it fell down over the winter. And so I'm always terrified to do my first visit to Page Ranch. But I went by, and not only did it look good, the guy has just taken this huge interest in it, the guy that owns it, and he's planted grass around the whole place. He has sprinklers running. He's built a new fence so no vandals can get in and no cattle can get in. And then he was working on the barn, which is an 1856 barn that my great-great-great-grandfather built. So I immediately emailed him like, wow, the house looks really great. And he's like, yeah, you kind of sparked something there. And my family feels really connected. So they want it, to be nice. And I was just like jackpot on that because it was so happy that he took over. And, I was kind of ready to just go, I did my part. I don't know what'll happen now, but it has definitely improved. So I was pretty excited about that.
My favorite thing that you just said was, I called the guy anyway.
I know, it's so embarrassing because I called him like, I'm this person and and I want to talk to you about the ranch. And he didn't live anywhere near there. He lives in another town. So he'd be like, yeah, I don't have time right now. And then I would call him in a few more days. Sorry, this is Lisa Michele again. I just want to ask you some questions. Yeah, call me tomorrow, And so like the fourth time I called him, Laurie remembers this. he goes, I'm sorry, I don't have time. And I said, yes or no? Just say yes or no. Just, can I do a dumpster or not? Just tell me. And he's like, what? What's the matter with you? And I said, I don't know. I just got to know. If it's not happening, I'll give up. And then he was like, well, I guess you can do it. But yeah, I probably have ruined his life in some ways, but he's been so great. Now look what's happened. So.
Oh, I love that. That's a story as much about your ghost house as it is about you and your tenacity.
And my obsessions.
No, I'm going to say, we're going to go with tenacity. It's a little more complimentary.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I love that exchange. And I think as we are talking about ways I'm here with Lisa, Michele, and Laurie, and we're talking about, connective storytelling that includes things like genuine curiosity, active listening, safety, asking questions, really, I like the idea of body language. And of course, if I am on the recipient of the story, I'm very effusive. But I think as we kind of are wrapping up, one thing I really want to hear from you both with your experience professionally in populations that maybe have different family stories, maybe some things are painful. How have you been able to use story to connect with people that either you've worked with, you talked about, Lisa, Michele, clients that you've represented? Because I think it's really important for us to understand how story can connect us to people, especially people with a different experience. And so I'd love to learn from both of you about maybe an example that you have or an approach that you would recommend for people who are wanting to use story to connect. And who wants to go first?
Okay, so I'm going to tell a story about Lisa Michele. I think, people learn that I am the director of Prevent Child Abuse Utah, and they have this universal reaction where they go, oh, I'm sorry, that must be so hard. And I was like, no, I'm preventing it. Preventing, it's good, it's a great job. But I do often have people bring their very intimate, very vulnerable stories to me all the time. And I remember there was one point where Lisa Michele and I worked together in a human service environment, and she was teaching tomorrow's leaders about how to tell the story of the work that we do, because we were working with really vulnerable populations, and we really wanted to be able to tell that story. And she would push us always and say, what is the story? What is the story of your agency? What are you doing? And then they would say something. She would say, no, that's not it. That's not the story. And she would push and push until they really got to the heart of what it was, right? Like, I remember, for example, she was pushing the director of the Division of Juvenile Justice Services. And she was like, no, and finally they got there. We give kids another chance, and we keep society safe, right? We ensure safety, and we give kids another chance. And I just thought, that is the story. That's the story. And I've really always thought that has always resonated with me about how we tell this story about what we do. And even today, I was using an example of when we're talking about, this was something that Lisa Michele always did in our work together, is always talking about who are the people that we aren't serving, what's invisible to us, right? That's like, what are the cases that were never opened? Because that's part of the story. And when so I'm in prevention now, right? So those invisible stories are my whole job now. I want more and more invisibility because there's less and less child abuse. So I think that's been such a cool way to frame the work we do around story and with story. So, yeah, sorry, that wasn't me telling a story to Lisa Michele. She already knows that, but I think it's such a good way to wrap the work in story.
What do you
It's
think,
true.
and I'm going to go just a little bit more with you, Laurie, and we'll go to you, Lisa Michele. What do you think is most important when the people in your organization are engaging with families that you talked about that are members of this vulnerable population in times of need? Like if we were to come from, how can we be better at engaging using story? What can we learn from your colleagues who are with people in a really vulnerable time, and maybe not always vulnerable, like it's preventative, right? But what?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. And I think for me, in terms of listening to those difficult and vulnerable stories, it's all about empathy, right? Having an empathetic response, making that a safe place for people, because we do often have people come to us and they're in the journey of it, right? They're feeling the fallout of what has happened when harm has been done. And that is a space to honor for sure. Or survivors of abuse who come to us and say, I feel really compelled, I want to do something. And I feel it an honor to be able to give them in that space something to do, right? We say, this is how you can help us prevent that from happening to someone else. This is how we work towards that mission and you can get involved. So for me, that's really empowering to be able to give them an empathetic moment, right? Where we don't know any of the people that they're talking about. We don't know what they've been through, but we have compassion and we've organized something for them that can help them move in a productive way. Like we have sometimes people who come to us who feel really frustrated because the case didn't go the way they wanted it to, and no one's being held accountable. And they're just left with such a feeling of frustration and unresolved and unresolution, I guess. And so we're able to give them something to cling on to, a way to be purposeful about what a next step could be.
Thank you. I appreciate the mention of empathy, which is encompassing so much of what we've talked about, and the safety and the listening and sort of honoring. And I like to think I like the phrase witness, right? Because witness it kind of encompasses what Lisa Michele talked about. Like it isn't about jumping in and solving, and what people oftentimes, and stories, just listening to them is really powerful. So Lisa Michele, what about you from your work? What kind of lens can you help us look through when we think about connecting through story with people who have different experiences than ours?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think one of the things from my work, I work a lot in addiction and substance abuse prevention and things like that. And so there's a lot of shame in that, and that does interfere with the storytelling a lot. And they don't know. Laurieann and I worked on an anti-methamphetamine initiative for a long time, years ago. And I would be presenting on our efforts, and these really, middle class mom and dad would come up to me afterwards. Well, I don't want to tell anyone, but, our adult daughter is a meth addict. And so we're raising her kids, our grandkids. And, we're probably the only ones in that situation. And I would say, you're like the 400th person that's talked to me this year in this exact situation. I'm so glad you told me your story. Please don't feel alone. This is what we're going to do about it. And then we designed interventions that had to do with bringing those families together who all felt like they were the only one in their community. And yet, because we were traveling around, they were, and thank goodness they were brave enough to come and talk to me. It was because I talked about substance abuse issues in my own family, and they felt like I was safe. Yeah, because I would say publicly, my grandfather was an alcoholic. He did get in recovery in his 40s. And that, my brother is in recovery. And then they would just think, okay, I can go tell her, but I have to do it privately because it's so ashamed. I'm so ashamed. So I just say the lens that you have to look through is give yourself out there to them. Don't try and, well, I need to hear your story. Just give yourself out there to them in whatever way you can. Show yourself to be an open-minded person that is not going to judge them. They're going to tell you their story. And honestly, it's just like Laurieann said, your reaction is going to give them some sense of, working on it or a step they can take, and I could say, there's this other person in your community, go talk to them, and they would both work on an initiative together. And, it was something as simple as a lot of children being raised in meth households will be the parent for their younger siblings. And these grandmas would be saying, how do I get the kids to let me do their hair? Because their older sister does their hair, and I'd just be like, I have the people you can talk to. And that story will mean something to these other people. And so it was very empowering, just like Laurieann said. And I would encourage people, even though their stories are difficult, be an open enough person that you will be able to hear them, and then you will be able to reflect back some empowering thing about it to them.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate, I could talk to you both for a long, long time, and I appreciate the perspective of kind of witnessing you re-engaging and the way that you model the genuine curiosity and active listening and safety and those other things we've talked about today with connective storytelling. And I especially appreciate the way that you've helped myself and others kind of understand how we can be in a space where we can witness or see someone. So thank you both for participating, and thank you to everyone who participated here. Just keep following us. If you want more live streams, you want more live streams because they're so fun, but we have more coming up, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thanks, everybody.